The author reflects on how a new presence in their home, arriving without fanfare, gradually altered their accustomed way of life and affected everyone within it. It seemed the very atmosphere in the house grew more saturated, as if the air had thickened with a dense energy ever since her stepfather started working from home after his promotion. This decision was practical and convenient for all, yet for the young narrator, it marked the beginning of changes she didn't immediately grasp. She was around 18 or 19 then, an age when one already has a sense of comfort, but doesn't yet fully comprehend true intimacy. The three of them formed a unique microcosm, where each day mirrored the last. Her mother left for work, while her stepfather remained in the living room, engrossed in his tasks, to the quiet accompaniment of instrumental music. At first, the girl felt almost invisible in this space, trying not to draw attention to herself. But it wasn't a need for physical invisibility. Rather, she was trying to shield herself from the force that the new family member radiated. Her stepfather's presence was palpable, despite his taciturn nature. His energy filled the house, creating a tension the girl tried to overcome by distancing herself. However, she constantly found herself encountering him. The author recalls how she gradually began to feel his attention, not through direct gazes, but in barely perceptible gestures. For instance, he might leave his coffee cup on the living room table, and as she passed by, the girl sensed she was being watched from the corner of his eye. This caused discomfort and altered her perception of the space. The house, previously divided into cozy room sanctuaries and cold corridors, now felt different. Her stepfather's presence created a certain anxiety that was difficult to articulate. Perhaps it was simply the fact that he was nearby, breathing the same air. But gradually, the girl began to grow accustomed to it, and she herself started to change. Her stepfather didn't display intrusive attention. He didn't make remarks or make her feel awkward. His presence was simply constant and silent. He had his own habits, like tapping his fingers on his glasses, which for some reason caught the girl's attention and made her ponder. He became a kind of mystery to her, one she tried to unravel. Over time, the girl began to feel more relaxed in his presence. She stopped being self-conscious about her clothes and could walk around the house in her pajamas. Passing through the hallway or living room, she felt his gaze, not intrusive, but soft and reserved. This created a sense of comfort, but at the same time, she realized these changes were affecting her too. The girl began to wonder if her stepfather noticed her changes, if he felt that her presence had also shifted somehow. At that time, she didn't know how to cope with these feelings, which mingled with everyday trifles and confused her. Her stepfather was becoming increasingly real and close, and the girl could no longer ignore the new and inexplicable feelings he stirred within her. She felt as though he saw something in her that she herself hadn't noticed. This question haunted her. It seemed that short, vague moments of mutual understanding arose between them when their gazes met. Something was happening, but no one dared to speak of it. And then one day, in one of those silent moments, her stepfather turned to her and looked with an expression she couldn't decipher. Time seemed to stop. The air grew thicker. The girl was speechless, simply gazing at him, and it seemed he enjoyed it. He raised an eyebrow as if he knew what she was thinking and suddenly asked, "Is something wrong?" His voice, tinged with a casual smile, inquired. The sudden question caught her off guard. Confusion clouded her face, leaving her speechless. She felt caught red-handed, as if implicated in something she couldn't yet comprehend. The simplicity of his words, their seeming innocence, struck a chord, causing an uncontrollable blush. She was at a loss, unsure how to find the words to express the turmoil raging within. As if anticipating her confusion, he continued the conversation, as though it were a continuation of a dialogue escaping her understanding. The only thing she could utter, obeying a sudden impulse, was, "Why do you only wear glasses sometimes? I never noticed that before." A light, almost boyish laugh followed, in which she sensed something more than mere amusement. A laugh that seemed to unveil new facets of her personality to him, allowing him to see deeper than she usually allowed. And then, As if sharing a secret, he said, "Oh, it's just for reading or when I work on the computer for a long time. The rest of the time, I manage perfectly fine without them." The simplicity of his answer astonished her. In that moment, the world around her seemed to cease existing. He no longer appeared distant. The image of a man engrossed only in his monitor screen vanished. She felt something new stirring between them, but couldn't define what it was. This feeling became increasingly persistent, foreshadowing a discovery that could change everything. She lost all sense of time, unsure when it had begun or where it would lead. The inevitability of what was happening between them was felt with each passing minute, yet denying it was impossible. The slightest gesture, a fleeting glance, became invisible threads, inexorably drawing them closer. She couldn't recall when exactly it started, but now ignoring what was happening was beyond her strength. He occupied all her thoughts, becoming the figure that constantly loomed in her consciousness. The most astonishing thing was that he too seemed to begin seeing her in a different light. She no longer hid in the shadows of her shyness. Something had changed. Perhaps it was because she no longer felt the oppressive weight of her own modesty. She felt the relationship entering a new phase, but she didn't understand why. In his presence, she felt more at ease, more relaxed, as if it were perfectly natural. She stopped caring about how she looked, old pajamas, messy hair. She sat on the sofa, not bothering to appear presentable. She was aware of what was happening but couldn't stop it, allowing her masks to fall. The strangest part was that he seemed not to notice these changes in her. Or was it just an appearance? He remained imperturbable, engrossed in his work. But deep down, she felt that he was starting to see the real her, that something new had appeared in his gaze. Not just a casual observation, but something deeper, something she couldn't put into words, but which touched her to her core. She remembered the day when working on the program seemed particularly difficult and stressful. Her mother, as usual, had left for a work meeting, leaving her alone with him. The silence and calm of the house seemed to mirror her internal state. He, as always, sat in the living room with his laptop, surrounded by papers. She approached closer, trying not to make a sound. One part of her wanted to disappear, to hide, while another craved his attention. He looked up. She didn't know if it was accidental or if he already sensed the change between them. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world around them ceased to exist. Time seemed to stop. She felt drawn into the unknown, and at the same time, she wanted to retreat, but she couldn't. Something in his gaze held her, making her feel utterly herself. His gaze was no longer casual. It was full of intimacy, as if he wanted to say something but hesitated. She hastily looked away, trying to show that nothing had happened, but her heart pounded wildly. She felt her palms sweat, as if he had taken possession of something sacred that resided in her soul, but which he somehow already knew. That day, she realized that a change had occurred within her. It wasn't just his words or actions, but his very presence, the influence he had on her. She could no longer walk calmly around the room without feeling the tension in the air. She could no longer be in the house without feeling his gaze upon her, but this didn't cause unpleasant sensations. On the contrary, it seemed to her that every one of his gestures held some deep meaning. Each time he adjusted his glasses or leaned back in his chair, she froze in anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. But she didn't know what. And then everything changed again. It was a normal morning, or so it seemed. She went down to the kitchen, sleepy, in her pajamas and with messy hair. He, as always, sat at the table, but this time he looked different. Something in his gaze made her feel that everything had changed. It was an unusual gaze, one that struck her with its unexpectedness. Something in his eyes suggested that he saw something more in her, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Something previously unfathomable stirred within her soul. "Are you okay?" His voice resonated, soft yet laced with a curiosity she couldn't answer. She took a step back, instinctively trying to conceal the turmoil that had seized her. "Yes, just need a little rest," she stammered, trying to sound casual. Though her heart pounded in her chest, His discerning gaze seemed to catch the falseness in her words, and at that moment he did something seemingly impossible. He rose from his chair and approached her, moving smoothly yet with unwavering determination. A faint aroma of coffee lingered in the air, but in that instant his presence completely dominated the space. Each of his steps echoed in her mind, her breath caught with anticipation as he drew nearer. As he passed, she felt the warmth of his body as if there were no barriers between them. The world around her blurred. All her attention was focused on him, on his proximity, so palpable that she felt the rhythm of his breathing. She didn't know how to react, what to say, what he expected from her. She didn't understand, couldn't grasp his intentions, but some inexplicable premonition told her that a decision had already been made. Turning to her, his gaze was no longer merely curious. It was charged with something more, as if he awaited her reaction, as if he was beginning to understand that she was no longer the same. She realized that this couldn't continue. Something had to happen, but she didn't know how to prevent it. Words caught in her throat, unable to escape. He took another step towards her and gently touched her hand. A simple gesture, but a shiver ran through her body. His touch was light yet profound, like a promise of something she didn't know how to handle, but which, for some reason, evoked desire. And when she looked up, she saw in his gaze not just curiosity, but a certain longing that she could no longer ignore. The tension in the air became almost palpable, and she felt every cell of her body respond to it. She didn't know what he wanted, but she felt as though he already knew what she wanted. A hesitant, almost awkward smile appeared on his lips. There was no turning back. They had reached a point of no return. He looked at her for a long time, and in that moment she saw not just a familiar person, but someone with whom she shared something indescribable. He didn't retreat, and in that instant she understood that their relationship had irrevocably changed. She lost her sense of reality. The line between imagination and actuality blurred. Days became a thin line between what she felt and what she believed he felt. But how could she know for sure? How could she be certain that her feelings weren't just an illusion, born of a mind desperately searching for something she couldn't comprehend? He was always there, so attentive, so quiet, yet different. She began to notice subtleties in his behavior. Every gesture that had previously gone unnoticed, the way he adjusted his glasses, pushed back his chair when sitting, the slight movement of his eyebrows when he was deep in thought. This transformed into a constant study, a silent obsession, compelling her to understand everything. But why, in the end, had it become so important to her? One afternoon, as she was in the kitchen preparing something simple, he appeared suddenly, as if he had read her thoughts. She knew he was home, but the very fact of his appearance sent a wave of energy through her that began to unnerve her, yet in a pleasant way she couldn't define. He stood close, very close. His gaze was fixed on her, as if he saw something she didn't want to show, something that was beginning to emerge, and she didn't know how to control it. "Do you need any help?" he asked in a soft voice, but his tone held a hidden question. He wanted to see if she could relax even more. He wanted to know if she was truly as distant as she seemed. She shook her head, trying to hide her agitation. "No, I'm just making sandwiches." But the truth was, she wasn't just making sandwiches. She was trying to cope with the tension that built up inside her every time he was near. She acutely felt his every movement, his breath, the way he held himself, as if his presence was so strong that she could no longer ignore it. He didn't leave as she expected. Instead, he remained standing and watching. And for a moment, time stretched, as if the room had shrunk, as if they were alone in a universe where everything was possible, yet dangerous. She felt his gaze upon her. She understood that he was observing not just her actions, but her very self. Her every movement acquired additional meaning. What did he find in her? What was he waiting for? "You've always been good at that," he remarked, nodding at the sandwiches she was preparing. The question seemed simple, but something about it disconcerted her. Why did he pay attention to such a minor detail? Why was he so attentive to details she thought he hadn't even noticed before? It seemed he hadn't paid any attention to her at all before. She chuckled softly, trying to lighten the mood. Good at what? Making sandwiches? She retorted, aiming for nonchalance, but nervousness still crept into her voice. Actually, I meant to say I'm quite independent, she joked, masking her confusion. However, as she said it, something within her broke. She began to open up, to reveal herself without caring about his opinion. He smiled, and that smile transformed everything. His gaze seemed to overcome all the barriers of distance she had tried to maintain. His eyes expressed more tension, more sincerity. You have a knack for it. You always seem to know exactly what you're doing, even when you're improvising, he confessed. That attracts me. She didn't know how to react, as if he were emotionally undressing her without touching her. These words touched her deeply. Never before had she been observed so intently. How could he see this in her? How could he see her in a way no one else could? Thank you, she mumbled, feeling her cheeks flush. She felt utterly defenseless before him. It frightened her how he could do this, how he could make her feel both so vulnerable and so alive. And then he did something unexpected. He walked over to the counter, picked up a piece of cheese she had just sliced, and asked in an almost apologetic tone, "May I?" And, without waiting for an answer, he already put the slice in his mouth. The protagonist was bewildered. The simple gesture with the cheese was imbued with something more. He stood so close, with ordinary innocence, but something in his eyes said he was perfectly aware of what he was doing. He was teasing her, and she didn't know how to react, yet she didn't pull away. She stood and watched him, unable to avert her gaze. He was still smiling, but a question was stirring within her. What was happening between them? What was he waiting for? As he chewed the cheese, the conversation shifted to more mundane topics, movies, books. To some extent, they were trying to ease the tension, but the protagonist knew he understood everything. She could no longer ignore what was at stake. He seemed to have crossed an invisible boundary between them, a boundary she had previously tried to maintain, but now he seemed intent on blurring, on overcoming. And when they finished their snack, he uttered a phrase that made her feel that everything had already changed. You know, he began in a calm tone, concealing something profound. This vacation has been good for you. You've become lighter, freer. She laughed, a little embarrassed, but at the same time understanding that he was right. Something was changing. She was changing. I'm just relaxing a bit, she replied, trying to sound casual, but her words came out shaky. She understood that there was something more to it, that he saw what she was still trying to grasp. As night fell, before her mother's return, the atmosphere in the house filled with a strange energy, as if the space had transformed into a stage for something she didn't know how to manage. She saw his glances, his restrained gestures, the unspoken hints that they both understood but didn't voice. The protagonist realized there was no turning back. Something was happening between them that couldn't be ignored. Tension hung in the air, invisible yet palpable, as if crossing the line was only a matter of time. She knew he felt it too. Now he looked at her differently, and she didn't know if she could ignore it anymore. Was it possible when they were so close and only one question remained in her mind? She felt that something was changing between them. What was once a barely noticeable presence now seemed to fill the space with growing intensity. He was always there, like a shadow she couldn't shake off. But the strangest thing was, he didn't try to leave. Every stolen glance intensified the tension. The boundary between what was allowed and forbidden became increasingly blurred, and she no longer knew where it lay. A hot summer afternoon arrived. Silence reigned in the house, broken only by the faint hum of a fan. Her mother, as usual, had left for work, and they were alone. And for the first time, it seemed to the protagonist that the air in the house was filled with an energy that was impossible to ignore. The silence she had once been able to tolerate now felt like an unspoken battlefield, where everything that happened held a deeper meaning. He was there, sitting at the living room table, surrounded by papers, a cup of coffee at hand. She looked at him as if at a painting, trying to decipher its meaning. He was engrossed in his work, but she felt his presence, more palpable than ever. Something within told her he felt it too, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore what was happening, she could no longer pretend that nothing was amiss. She felt his every movement, as if it were a reflection of her own desires. He didn't need to do anything to affect her. He had already affected her simply by his presence. His presence was felt in every cell of my body, like an unseen force exerting influence by the simple fact of its existence. In the kitchen, I tried to distract myself with trivial tasks, striving to maintain an appearance of calm. Yet, despite my efforts, I constantly felt his presence with my mind and body. His every movement, every fleeting glance, created a sensation as if the surrounding world ceased to exist. I was aware of what was happening and felt the same as he did. However, this situation seemed incredibly complex and wrong. How could such a desire arise? Suddenly, as if on some signal, he rose and walked towards me, without uttering a word. There was something new in his movements, something that shortened the space between us. I stood before a choice, to continue ignoring what was happening or to succumb to the feelings that were igniting within me. He approached. His energy, like a magnetic field, began to invade my personal space, which I could no longer resist. His familiar yet new scent filled everything around, consuming me with his presence and making it difficult to breathe. As he leaned in to take the sugar, our hands accidentally brushed. This fleeting touch sent a shiver through me. It felt like I might lose control. "Sorry," he said and quickly pulled away. However, it wasn't enough. An invisible trace remained, and I stood frozen in indecision. In that moment, he looked at me differently, as if he saw something new or stopped hiding what had always been obvious. My heart raced. He was so close yet so distant, as if an invisible barrier separated us. A barrier that had lost its relevance. How could he be both so alluring and inaccessible? "Are you okay?" he asked in a soft voice, yet full of hidden meaning. I knew he was watching me intently and felt the same as I did. But how could we openly talk about it? How could we break the silence and acknowledge the connection between us? I could no longer hide my feelings. "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. "I don't understand what's happening, but I can't ignore it." At that moment, something broke inside me, as if I had confessed to what was happening for the first time. He came closer, and I realized there was no turning back. When he first touched me, time slowed. His hand on my skin and the way he pulled me close evoked entirely new sensations within me. I realized this was a pivotal moment, when words lose their meaning. Our lips met, and the world around us vanished. All that remained was this kiss, this connection. It was gentle and tentative, yet filled with an intensity I hadn't known. He didn't pull away but drew me closer, breaking down everything around us. In that kiss, we admitted what we had always known but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Desire and tension surfaced, and I didn't know how to return to my former life. When we parted, I understood that nothing would ever be the same. Our gazes met and a silence hung between us, filled with hidden meaning. Words were superfluous. His eyes spoke for themselves. However, his words conveyed a sense of restraint, an unwillingness to acknowledge the obvious. "This shouldn't happen again," he said in a low voice, as if trying to convince himself. But I knew what he felt. I was aware of the connection between us and couldn't deny it. I understood that it was wrong, that we were crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Yet I couldn't imagine my life without him, without this desire that had already taken root within me and which was impossible to ignore. In that moment, I wanted only one thing, for him to look at me again and touch me. But I understood that this moment was unique because deep down, we knew it wasn't just a kiss, but something more, something that couldn't be undone. Despite the tenderness of the kiss, its effect was profound. Something broke inside me and there was no going back. I pulled away, feeling the tension build. I realized we had crossed a line and now everything would be different. I didn't know what the future held for us, but that kiss became a point of no return. After what happened, a strange silence settled in the house, not the usual quiet that comes after tasks are completed. It was a heavy silence, filled with tension that hung in the air. I knew he was nearby, but I understood that changes had occurred between us. The kiss, the unspoken words, and the stolen glances became an invisible line that simultaneously separated and bound us, and it could no longer be undone. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. The mask of indifference, which had served as protection for so long, crumbled under the onslaught of suddenly surging emotions. The kiss became a sort of door to the unknown, one that could now not be closed. A hurricane of conflicting emotions raged within, guilt mingled with insatiable desire. It seemed something forbidden, yet all the more alluring, had arisen between them, resonating in every cell of her body. He had changed. He became more distant, yet at the same time more real. Everything around them transformed into a theatrical stage where both knew the script, but no one dared to voice it. He avoided her gaze, but she felt his presence more acutely than ever. Confused, she tried to maintain an appearance of composure, hiding the passions raging within. The hours dragged on, agonizingly slowly, and although they were in the same house, an invisible chasm lay between them. She felt that he was ready to speak, to express what he could no longer keep to himself. And although she understood the inevitability of this conversation, a part of her soul desperately resisted what she was about to hear. Finally, he approached. His gaze was serious, softened only by a slight spark unique to him. He seemed to hesitate, battling an unknown force that had spun out of control. She anticipated his words, but they still caught her off guard. "I need to tell you something," he whispered, lowering his voice. "What happened between us was a mistake that I feel has deeply affected me, and I don't know how to deal with it. It touched me so profoundly that I cannot ignore it." He paused, choosing his words carefully, "But I understand that this cannot continue." She knew he was right. The bridge was burned. The kisses, the words, the gestures, all had left an indelible mark on their souls. Repetition was unthinkable. Something within her screamed, begging him to stop, not to utter the fatal words, to prolong the moment when everything was still possible. But he continued, "I don't want to be that person for you anymore, and you don't deserve that. You deserve more, someone who can give you everything you need without fear and guilt." She wanted to object, to scream, to cry, to say that consequences didn't matter, that only the feelings they shared in that moment were important, but words caught in her throat. There were no more phrases capable of expressing the full complexity of what was happening. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. But that doesn't undo what happened." Her voice carried a quiet sadness, an acknowledgement that this moment marked the end of something she hadn't yet fully grasped. They looked at each other for a long time. Then he did the hardest thing. He stepped back, as if bidding farewell to what was not meant to be. But even in this parting gesture, there was tenderness, as if he wanted to leave a last memory before turning the page. She understood him. He was leaving to save them both. She could no longer harbor illusions about something that would never be right. What awaited them after all that had transpired? The subsequent days turned into a succession of loneliness and reflection. She tried to return to her usual life, but something inside her was broken. The house no longer felt the same. His presence was felt everywhere, in every corner, in every memory. She felt that he too was grappling with the weight of what had happened, and even if they tried to move on, the past would still haunt them. Their last conversation became a kind of key, opening the door to the future, although the past still held her captive. He said, "I know it will never be easy for us, but we have to move on. We can't get stuck in something beyond our control. However real it was, we can't go back." She knew he was right. In that moment, their story came to an end, but this experience changed her forever. What happened forced her to realize the full complexity of human emotions, the delicate line between what is allowed and forbidden, and the impact our choices have on our lives. In time, she understood that everything she had gone through was not in vain. This story, this desire, this passion taught her something profound about love, guilt, and forgiveness. For the most important lessons are learned in the most difficult moments. Life goes on, and now she knows that she can move forward because deep down we all must learn to live with the marks that life leaves on us. Sometimes these marks are deep, sometimes barely noticeable, but all of them shape who we are.